So we are in. Phenomenal. So welcome to another Sticky interview. My name's Nathan Simmonds. I'm senior trainer and coach for MBM, Making Business Matter, the training provider, soft skills provider for the UK grocery and manufacturing industry. What I do with these interviews is to be sharing the thoughts and concepts of great people in great spaces doing great work to help you be the best possible version of yourself. And today I'm speaking to a gentleman I got to meet last week by the name of Paddy Willis. Paddy, I'm going to read his bio here. I'm going to tell you why some of this is so engaging. For me, though, Paddy is the founder and CEO of Mission Ventures and has a passion for building better challenger brands. He was co-founder of disruptive baby food brand Plum, which was sold in year 5 to Darwin PE in 2010 on retail sales of £15 million, which on its own, Paddy, is pretty phenomenal. Since then, he has been mentoring and supporting startups across the industry with the first UK food accelerator launch in January 2015. Recently, Mission Ventures announced their partnership in the Good Food Fund, a 1.8 million fund established by Big Society Capital with Guy's and St Thomas's charity to tackle childhood obesity with market-led solutions. And this is where it got interesting for me why I wanted to and when I reached out to Paddy. So there's 3 elements to this. One is challenger brands. I thought that's really interesting, disrupting markets. 2, childhood obesity. This is a huge thing that's going on with the way that the industry is moving. And then I got thinking, those 2 facets on their own are difficult enough. What do effective presentation skills, what is a great presenter in that space where you're talking to companies about challenger brands that may put them out of business potentially or disrupt their market, and also getting people to make moves on the amount of sugars and salts and fats, etc., they're putting into their foods. And what sort of skills have you got to have in order to present to that level to get people to make those shifts? And I thought, this is a person I need to get to know. This is a person I need to ask some questions to, and this is a person that needs to be in this interview. Paddy, thanks for being here.
Oh, thank you for the invitation, Nathan. I'm delighted to join you.
Thank you. So look, one of the first things is, and we talked a little bit about this before, kind of that necessity to create a brand. Why do you do what you do? Right. Well, originally it was Plum Baby Foods, but now you're helping other markets do that disruptive thing that you do. Why do you do what you do?
Well, they always say that if you do what you love, you'll never have a job in your life. I think I probably got that wrong, but you know what I mean. The broad principle is that if you do what you love, then every day is a great opportunity and great fun. And I do what I do, and that's in terms of working with founders and entrepreneurs of, in this case, food and drink businesses, but I have worked with a whole broad range of different sectors over the years, because I'm drawn like a moth, if you like, to the passion and the commitment and the vision of these individuals who often don't, and particularly this is very true in the food sector, and this is a completely unscientific observation, but it's based on having worked with food and drink startups over the last five plus years on our business accelerators, is that I would say 85, if not possibly 90% of founders do not come from within the industry. And the reason I think that is because if they did come from the industry, they probably wouldn't start, because they would realize just what a challenge it is to succeed in this market. It's also been helped by the fact a lot of, barriers to entry have come down. It's become much easier, and resources to things like shared kitchens and consultants and everything else have become much easier than when we set up Plum back in 2000, launched in 2006. So it's the passion for the people and the purpose that they have behind what they do. And I'm sure we'll talk a bit about that in some of the context of challenger brands. But and then the other thing, and this will come back to, it's sort of relevant to the concept of what makes for a good presentation, because really it's about storytelling. And a good brand is about telling a good story. And I always remember there's a guy called Daniel Priestley, an Australian entrepreneur, who I try and think when it was I heard him speak. It was at a small event for founders, I don't know, let's call it 10 years ago. And he talked about the fact that he is a very keen mountain walker, And he said the thing when you go mountain walking is that you know where you're going, and you set off up this hill, which the hill becomes a mountain, and you get to the top, and you eventually get there, and you take in the view around you. But inevitably, your eye is drawn to the ridge that's going to take you to the next peak, and that's going to take you on to the next part of your journey. And he says, but if you were to look down where you've just come from, you would see that there inevitably can be people following in your footsteps, following the paths that you've trodden. And he says that it doesn't really matter what you do, and this isn't exclusive to an entrepreneur, it could be anybody in a career, and in life in general, is that you will, at all different stages in your life, you'll be standing on a mountain of value. And that's everything that's helped you get to that point in your life. And he says the simple thing to do, and the pleasurable thing to do, is to say, look behind you and say, actually, do you know what? I wouldn't go left there, I'd go right, because I tried left and it was a bit tricky, but I went right, and I'm here. So it doesn't really matter whether you're 5 minutes ahead of somebody, or 5 hours ahead of them, or 5 years ahead of them, or 50 years ahead of them. There is always this concept of being able to share with people what you've learned on that pathway, and that's what I love doing. So I do a lot of mentoring, do a lot of activity particularly around helping young students to understand the world of entrepreneurship, help open their eyes to possibilities as and when they eventually get into the workplace. So it really comes down to working with people with passion and wanting to try and share that journey, share what I've learned from standing on whatever mountaintop I might be on, or even the mountain I might be halfway up. But wherever you are, it's just helping to play that back.
And it's exactly that, and that's why I do what I do. With 23 years in leadership positions, I have made a lot of mistakes. I've made a lot of errors. I've failed countless times. I've been knocked back from interviews. I've been frustrated at myself, and it's not about denying, and I've learned the difference between pain and suffering. It's not about denying people the pain, because you need the pain to make the movement. But it's helping people to make the movement faster, so they don't wallow in it and then it becomes suffering, they don't do anything, and then it takes them longer to extract that goodness out of where they're going. And if you can pass that back 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 20 years to someone else when they're at the turning point in their journey at 23 rather than 43, and I say that leadership and parenting are not two sides of the same coin, they're exactly the same thing. And you want the people in your care to supersede you. No parent in their right mind wants their child to be equal to or less than them. They want them to supersede. So when you go and mentor and business coach or do all those things, you want that person to supersede you so they can go and do something incredible. And that comes from people like you, sharing some of that wisdom to help them go left instead of right at the right time, phenomenally powerful.
And it's all, I'm a great believer in karma, and what goes around comes around, and all these other phrases that basically mean that you treat others as you would wish to be treated. So every day I'm learning something new. I wish I'd been braver to ask for help and mentorship when I was younger. But there was a sort of a sense that I had in my head, if no one else's, it was just in my head, that I had to sort of figure it out for myself. And the reality is that there are so many things that I've done. And you're, by the way, absolutely right. You learn far more from the failures than you do from the successes. And successes, you think, oh, that was good. And you carry on and you do a bit more. But actually, when it doesn't work out, that's when you sort of think, well, why didn't it work out? And you're forced to rethink about it and readdress it. So, yeah, so I think, for anyone in leadership positions or aspiring to a leadership position, it's having the humility to know when you don't have all the answers. And I'm a great believer in authenticity in terms of, whether it's a brand or whether it's your personality. People can smell bullshit, 100 miles away. And to a degree, that's sort of, in a challenger brand context, I sort of think that's what's happening now to a degree with the shift away from some of the big colossal brands that have been around for decades. People don't quite believe in them the way maybe they're used to, and their inquiring mind is leading them more towards brands that speak in a different language, that put forward values that these people, that the consumer can relate to. And that's another reason I love what I do, because I get to work with people who are expressing those values every day in the products and the brands and the businesses that they're building.
And that's an interesting tangent, and we might not be able to go down that today. One of the research pieces I did about a year ago came up with only 27% of all employees actually believe in their company values.
Wow.
Which is huge. So then when you look at the engagement levels of the globally employed, it was something like 80%, 87% of the employed are not engaged in the work that they're doing. So those two equations, kind of the statistics, sit quite nicely together. When you then transfer that over to the client and the customer demographic, okay, what does this person actually want? Now, because there's a wider choice, I can go and choose a product from a person that I think has my values or looks like me or holds my best interests at heart. And having this one size fits all potentially from a large organization may not be the best approach these days. And I say that more now from a coaching aspect. As coaches and mentors, we know there are a million different coaches out there, but it's all about finding your demographic, finding your niche. And potentially from what I'm hearing from you is that sort of thinking is also bleeding into the food industry and challenger brands as well. Hugely interesting.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, if you look up what is a challenger brand, essentially it starts from a mindset. It starts from a position of saying, really, is this as good as it gets? And if I look back to the genesis of the idea for Plum Baby, which was my wife Susie's idea at the time, it was, we'd had a gap of 8 years between child 2 and child 3, and going back, although we were never big consumers of baby food, but it was always a convenience thing. It'd be good to have something that you could chuck in a baby bag and take away for the weekend, etc. And it was the fact that nothing really had changed, nothing had moved on, and so that was inspiration for Susie in this case to go out and say, look, we're sure we can do something better than this, and that's what led to the genesis of Plum Baby, and we helped change the category as a result. But it was born out of that frustration that big food, and we're talking about brands like Heinz and Danone, Cowgate, Organics, which was the sort of Lizzie brand, had formed Organics some years prior and had built it very successfully, and was really probably the only challenger brand at the time in that space. And yet again, that sort of had elements that were a bit tired and not driving real innovation. And that's what led us down the path to do what we did, which was to launch a premium but ambient baby food. And it was actually, when we sold in 2010, we were still quite considerably bigger than Ella's Kitchen. And in the years that followed, guess what? Paul Lindley led Ella's Kitchen to be the biggest baby food brand in the UK, overtaking Cowgate and Heinz in the process. I don't think we ever believed we could do that. We'd always set out, by the way, to have a 5-year plan to an exit, which is exactly what we achieved. But the point being that we broke down the barriers of how things were done in that sector. Now, of course, what's happened is that Ella's Kitchen has gone from being the challenger brand to being the leading brand, and once that happens, you're no longer the challenger brand; you're the incumbent. So, it'd be interesting to see over the years what happens to those myriad of smaller brands that are out there now trying to challenge the marketplace. But that's what's. And there's 2 good examples of parents setting up brands that tackled something that they saw missing in the market, and that's what we see an awful lot of, particularly with brands that are seeking to do something around childhood obesity. Often, in cases being set up by founders who are parents and have been shocked or just disappointed by the sugar-laden, additive, heavy products that their kids are being forced to, or encouraged to consume. So that's so that I think it starts with a mindset, and it is that element of, do you know what, I don't think this doesn't have to be the only way, and that's we're talking about food and drink, but obviously that's happened in other markets as well. I mean, Tesla's quite an interesting example of how somebody's managed to build an incredibly successful company challenging the automobile industry, which so it's the challenger brands are everywhere, And I think what's encouraging is that the younger generations now, by which I speak as someone who can call millennials the younger generation, the Gen Zs and millennials are making more purpose-led decisions, value-led decisions, and that's leading them to choose brands that are shaking things up. And that's what, fervently I believe that, and this is part of the work we want to achieve as Mission Ventures, is to help transformation through by helping to build better challenger brands that can lead a process of change, very much as what's happened in the baby food market, where now suddenly the status quo has been shifted towards a brand that is doing better food and filling little tummies with more nutritious food than was acceptable before.
So many good things in that. One is, you talked about having that 5-year plan and working to that, and I think that's one of the key effective presentation skills that are there. Is when you go into a presentation, you begin with the end in mind. When you go into a business, you begin with the end in mind. When you go into kind of disrupting a market in a certain space, you begin with the end in mind. Stephen R. Covey, 7 Habits of, it's a life lesson. And you also touched on what is a challenger brand, and it's about disruption, and it's about that necessity is the father of invention. Like you say, you had the gap between child 1 and 2. Actually, can we do something different here? Can we bring something that we know solves a problem to us, and because it solves a problem to us, actually it probably solves a problem to another 2 million people out there in some way, shape or form. And the other interesting kind of analogy that popped in my head is you're looking at Ella's Kitchen. Now they were the disruptor, now they've become the incumbent, now they're number one. It's almost like Bannister's 4-minute mile. He breaks the 4-minute mile by whatever it was, half a second, 2 seconds or whatever. And then that record was broken something ridiculous like 27 times in the next 12 months because he proved it could be done. Ella's Kitchen goes out and does that. Plum baby food comes in, another one comes in, another one comes in, because like you say, you're at the top of the mountain or you're halfway up the mountain and people go, bloody hell, look at Paddy, where's he off to? Maybe I can do that in my space for something that's important to me. I'm going to start climbing that mountain as well. So when you talk about what is a challenger brand, it's about disruption and doing something from necessity. Where does it come from? Like you say, it's purposeful. It's from the heart in the majority of times. What role do you think challenger brands play in helping to shape the food industry moving forward more so then?
Well, it is this point about saying, if you're going to disrupt a category, and come back to this example with Plum and Ella's, is that you go about doing that because you believe in not settling for second best. You forge away, and in doing that, there's that sort of drag effect where people come into that sort of slipstream, if you like, and suddenly the new normal is to be healthier. Or all of our recipes when we launched were, and at that point you could still call them superfood, but they were all superfood ingredients. And we introduced this whole kind of concept of baby food going away from being rather sort of bland, colourless fillers to something which actually carried purposeful ingredients. And now that's very much the case, pretty much not all across the industry, but much more prevalently. And as I say, that's what's led to Ella's being able to come up alongside and overtake us and become the dominant party. Another good example in that is Fever-Tree. Who would ever have believed? I remember as a kid going in and sort of sipping from bottles of Schweppes tonic water in my parents' drinks cabinet and feeling terribly sophisticated in the process, and also a bit naughty. And who would ever have believed that sort of gold yellow label of Schweppes was ever going to be toppled as the market leader? And then, lo and behold, within 15 years of launch, Fever-Tree has done that. Now, I know they've had a few challenges more recently, but that still doesn't take away from the fact that they were able to take on a market leader. And I think a lot of their very, very clever advertising and marketing was what this whole point about, if 3/4 or whatever it was of your drink actually is the mixer, then surely that's as important a part of the drink as the tonic, as the gin or the spirit. So in terms of what can the challenger brand do to change the market? it can do exactly that. It can lead, and it can demonstrate that there are better ways to do things, or different ways to do things, and that those different ways to do things are actually meeting a consumer need.
And that got me thinking, and this is why I'm enjoying this conversation, me learning about challenger brands, me learning about kind of, it's almost like these homebrew beer companies, craft beers, and so many of them coming about. And actually this level of quality that's pushing up now, because actually we want something. We don't want complacency. We don't want generic. We want different. We want inspiring. We want purposeful products with values. And then it got me thinking about Simon Sinek's book, and I'm still yet to read this, The Infinite Game. And one of his kind of concepts in there was having a worthy adversary. It's not about having competition. Is you want someone that's going to push your buttons and sometimes really annoy you and agitate you, but they push you to be better than you were before, because you know if you stop paying attention, they're going to accelerate away from you. It's not that they're going to crush you, it's they're going to take the market lead. Well, actually, how do we bounce ideas off of each other from the other side of the court? How do we use them as the encouragement to help us make our own products obsolete before someone else does? And really pushing this thinking in. So actually we need challenger brands to be stepping up so that actually we step up and cut out the complacency. Super important.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I would say, you know, you can look at that in sort of management situations as well, is that if you don't have people who are sort of thrusting challenger personnel, if you like, that are getting you've got to keep thinking. You've got to keep thinking, what am I doing to deliver value? What am I doing to demonstrate that I've got ideas and capabilities that could be put to broader, greater use within this organisation that I belong to. And I think, you know, this is so important. You know, I often, and I can remember this with, I've been in situations in the past when you've been in a business and suddenly someone's announced that they're doing a product or a service which is very similar to yours. You go, oh, God damn it, we're too late. You know, we've missed the boat or this. No, actually, because if you're out there on your own, you're an outlier, and it's really hard to build a lot of scale behind that, because you know, particularly the challenge the way things have been done traditionally. As soon as it becomes a little bit more mainstream and people start to get into that same flow, then that's when people will start to go from beyond just the early adopters into the next sort of categories of consumers. So you do need people to come on that journey. You know, clearly you hope obviously that you're going to keep a nose ahead and be the dominant partner in that race, if you like, towards perhaps toppling the incumbent and becoming the new market leader. But doing it on your own and in isolation is a real challenge. So as hard as it can be sometimes to see people coming into the same market segment as you know, you have to recognize the fact that that's doing two things. One, it's validating your concept and your idea, but it's also making it easier for consumers and clients to understand that what you're doing is not so odd, because actually there's various people doing so different flavors, different degrees of that, and then that's giving them a choice to choose from that, rather than thinking, well, do I go mainstream or do I go the slightly oddball outlier? And you know, not for no reason do we have that old adage of, you know, no one ever got fired for choosing IBM. So if you've got a situation where you can see a selection of options that look different to maybe in the way the market looked a year, 2, 10 years ago, then making a choice from that is less challenging, maybe less threatening to you as an individual or to you as a business leader. So I think that's really important that people need that counterbalance.
And I think that's also a test of your own focus and optimism and belief in what it is you're doing. Because if you're presenting with confidence that product, or you're feeling that kind of knock of someone else is in this space, that you can stand up and present with confidence what it is you believe in, why you're doing it, the purpose of this, where this is coming from. Again, as you say, people will buy that authenticity. They're buying into your values. They're buying into why you're doing it. Not necessarily just because someone else thinks they can undercut you and deliver a cheaper product at a better price. There will still be a marketplace for you as long as you're storytelling and presenting that element in a way that is bringing those people on board and encouraging them to buy. Super important. Thinking though, what's now in the big project? So we talked, I alluded a little bit to the Guy's and St. Thomas's element. What's the current big project?
So this is really exciting, and I get slightly daunted in that excitement, because we are trying to tackle something that is so huge and yet so important. So that we've all been aware of the incessant rise of obesity as a nation, and most worryingly, how it's starting very early on. And childhood obesity now is a big topic. So Guy's and St Thomas's charity has set themselves a 10-year program where they are investing in and exploring different ideas to see what can be done to challenge the status quo, if you like. And one of the they wrote a report with Big Society Capital, who are the other co-funder behind the Good Food Fund, which we are working with. And they published a report called Healthy Returns, which was really trying to, which was setting out to explore this concept of, could you derive market-led solutions by backing and supporting healthier challenger brands? And so that's the context, excuse me, if you like. So this is one of many projects that they are funding, and because they are a place-based charity, Guy's and Tommy's charity, they are focusing particularly on Southwark and Lambeth. Now, Southwark and Lambeth happens to have some of the worst rates of childhood obesity in London, and there is a particular obesity corridor that runs across both those boroughs. And so what we are doing is working with Ascension Ventures. Have been nominated as the fund manager for what is a 1.8 million fund, the Good Food Fund, which will provide equity and debt solutions to a range of businesses that can help to try and tackle this challenge. We are running a business accelerator, which is likely to extend to about 10 or dozen businesses, particularly with a focus on healthy snacking, but not exclusively, but looking at healthy snacking, and are there ways where with younger children, so primary school age children, that we can encourage families and the children to adopt healthier habits, if you like, by providing more options for them. And this is really a pilot program where, if we can work with the challenger brands and with retailers and other routes to market over the next 12, 18 months, the ambition for the funders is to create a much larger fund that will not only be supported by themselves, but by others within the investment community. And in doing that, bring with them the retail industry, the wholesale distribution industry, and really, again, comes back to this point really of saying, look, is this as good as it gets? Are there not things that we can be doing to improve the environment in which families, particularly those from low-income families, because low-income families, now I'll give you a classic example within the sort of boroughs we're talking about. So 10% of children leaving primary school in Dulwich Village are obese, but that rises threefold to 33% in Camberwell Green. So there you've got two wards where there's this huge disparity, and it comes down to the fact that the options available for low-income families are poorer quality. And this is the issue that we're trying to face. So can we work with the challenger brands to help them take what are classically more expensive products to make, because they're using usually more premium ingredients, and by definition they're using smaller runs in volume, and therefore their costs are higher. They need the margins in order to attract the investors and to stay in business. So they have to inevitably end up marketing themselves through the more expensive retail channels, which are sort of really just not even just not the hunting ground of low-income families. So this is what we're looking at: is how do we help steer the brands and the industry into ways of thinking about how we can disrupt the way things have been done traditionally. So it's very, very exciting. I mean, a huge challenge, and it won't just be down to us and a dozen or so brands, but this is a test bed, if you like, for looking at how we can work with the brands with the distribution channels to see what can be done to provide scalable brands that can address the challenge and at the same time generate healthy returns for those that are investing in them.
And potentially so it was sparking some old ideas that I have about food, etc. I obviously have a relationship with sugar. I alluded to that in some of our previous conversations and how that affected my health at a very young age. I ended up being diagnosed with Crohn's disease and having imbalances in my gut flora, which ended up having huge sections of my intestine removed, abscesses and all sorts. And I was lucky enough to cure that because we were very focused on our diet. Not everyone has access to that information. On the flip side of it, though, is actually when I think about that question of what place do the challenger brands have in the market, well, actually, things like sugar beet, sugar cane, the whole huge swathes of power over the content of food and over the way that people buy. Actually, one of the things I was looking at, I used to grow a vegetable called a yacon, which actually, when boiled down, produces inulin. So your body doesn't actually digest it, and that sugar. But because no one's farming that at a large level, you can't produce that sugar at an, in effect, such a low rate purchasing price because of the volume of sugar beet that's on the market potentially. So you need some of these challenger brands to be stepping in with these new solutions that are then going to go, actually, here's a product that's at the right price, in the right place, delivering the right flavor, so that people can make a choice when they've got that in front of them. And then in doing so, they can do something that's healthier and better for themselves, but also at a price bracket that suits that demographic in that space as well. Super important.
Yeah, definitely. And no, you're right. And we work with a brand called True Foods, who you mentioned inulin. They've adopted inulin. So they've gone from being just a sort of granola brand initially to being a whole range of granolas and porridges, but also doing what they call a jar full of fiber, which is liquid inulin, and coming from chicory root, and it's got fantastic qualities for helping to close the fiber gap, which a far too high percentage of our population experience. We struggle to get our fiber daily, but we're also definitely not getting our fiber. And you've referred to gut flora and gut health. This really is the big movement that we see is brands that are extolling gut health and some very exciting evolutions in that space. A long way still to go, but if people always say trust your gut, it's the second brain and everything, and yet we don't treat the gut very well. And you just alluded to some decisions that you were making as a child that led you to have all sorts of drastic medical issues later. And this is why it's so important for us to education will go so far with consumers, but there is a role for brands to play in challenging the way things have been done in the past. It's hard if you're a small producer with relatively expensive ingredients and a need to, obviously like every business, to make a margin that's sustainable. So we're going to be looking at what are the things that can be done around that to help you to scale your business effectively, and in doing that to then become a more affordable, healthier range that becomes, if you like, an omni brand in terms of it's available to everybody rather than just a select few.
Exactly that. And I remember the turn of the kind of the buying process when going from normal food products when organic started to become a thing. And then it was actually, or being organic was a lifestyle choice. It wasn't actually an option, because organic food was so expensive at the time. And I think it's getting better now. But like you say, it's having those options available where actually the contents and the ingredients are of not of necessarily a premium quality, of a good quality, where it is affordable, it is accessible, it's healthy, environmentally sound, and it's also good for us internally at a gut level. And I think some of that's going to happen at a personal level, company level, but also at kind of the food produce level as well. So how are those organisations being run, and what are they saying is okay to go down that food chain, which actually is causing a lot of the problems, and how that's manipulating the thinking. Because and this is an interesting tangent, is I was screaming out for sugar all of the time. I always wanted sugar whenever, but it wasn't actually me screaming out for sugar. It was the internal yeast infection. It was the bacteria triggering responses in my brain to scream out for more sugar to feed the imbalance, which then caused a hospitalization. And not everyone gets to understand that. You just go to the sweet shop and you buy whatever's there because you feel you have a necessity to do that.
Yep.
And you almost feel as if that choice is taken away from you because you just don't know any better, unfortunately, because that's the environment you're in.
No, definitely. And I think, as I said, the big focus for the charity is to explore how we can help those lower income families to, through improved options. And that's everybody wants affordable, tasty, nutritious, healthier food. But in a lot of cases, the cheaper options are not. You're either cheap or you're tasty, nutritious, and healthy. There's massive oversimplification, but that's classically what you see. And so shelf space is given by retailers to those brands where they can shift in volume, and it's really hard for a healthier brand to necessarily get those hurdle rates in place. So I think where there are fewer options available for affordable and healthy and tasty food, and also the other element, of course, is around what are the options for playful exercise that will engage children. Sadly, we're talking at the time of the pandemic and the lockdown, where it becomes really hard for families to, you imagine you're in a tower block somewhere in Lambeth or Southwark. Your options are limited. I'm here in Surrey and I've got a garden I can walk around and a village to explore, and take the dog for a walk. So, there are these polarities, unfortunately, in society, and to a degree, this is being really the spotlight of the pandemic. The pandemic is shining a spotlight on this issue. And I was reading just the other day that I think it was Just Eat had released some data which said that families are tending to order their takeout food for delivery earlier, sometimes up to 2 hours earlier than they would do normally, and they're adding on more desserts and sort of ancillary purchases with their meal, because people spent the whole day in lockdown, and if you're a frazzled parent, it's much easier to say, oh, okay, and you'll get the sticky pudding or the dessert, whatever that the kid is asking you for, so there comes another sugar hit just before bedtime. So it is really hard, and certainly the work that came out of the Healthy Returns report demonstrated that, of course, a large part of these inner city low-income families are populated by single parents, usually mums at home, with a couple of young kids. And the challenges are legion. There's the worry about getting the bills paid. There's the worry about the children's health. There's a worry about their schooling. There's a worry about who they might be hanging out with. All these things are crowding in on you. And also, if you haven't necessarily come from a household where there's been a culture of cooking and such like, that your field of vision, if you like, the options within your field of vision are very narrow. And with the pressures of your existence comes an even greater narrowing of focus. And it's that sort of fight or flight mode where you are literally looking at survival. How do we get through the day? How do we get through the next bill run, the next payday, etc., etc. And so you will naturally gravitate towards the simpler solutions. And sometimes that's the takeout. Sometimes it's a snack to help keep the kids quiet and off your back whilst you try and get the laundry done, or whatever the things are, and it's really, really tough. And the food industry has an opportunity now to step up and give shelf space to healthier brands. give opportunities for brands with purpose and with real values to drive and initiate change, because we know that can happen. But unfortunately, we've just also gone through several weeks of panic buying where shelves have been cleared to make more space for the big brands. And I understand there are reasons why that happens, but there has to be a balance here, and people will want choice. They'll want better options available to them, and in doing that, you need to give airtime, space on shelf to the healthier challenger brands that can not only resonate with how you feel about the world in general, but also to provide tastier options and tastier solutions than just the mainstream.
The other thing you picked up on there was we've had to pivot our business quite rapidly in this very changing last few weeks that we've been in lockdown, and we've been doing some live trainings, 1 o'clock, 20 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes, and one of those was around isolation. And actually, people have been getting tired early on. So the initial part of this, they were getting tired around 8 o'clock and feeling lethargic. They're not able to focus on their projects. They don't want to start new projects. You've got these levels of worry and stress that are sitting in the background. But you find a lot of these things that people are doing are actually stress reactions. They're actually symptoms of cabin fever. So you compound a couple of these elements of, okay, I'm in a tower block in wherever in this small space, I've got children, okay, potentially we've got some other stuff here that around price, value, quality, all those elements. And then you bring all that into one bundle. You then put that into the melting pot of COVID-19, and all of a sudden those choices start to compound very rapidly. And like you say, the dessert quantity or ancillary purchases goes up to backfill kind of the abnormal environment you're in, the alien environment, and kind of compensate that to try and make yourself feel better with a sugar hit that brings the emotions up and the dopamine levels up, just to deal with the negative situation that people are in, and they're trying to balance that out.
And it is interesting. There was some data I saw recently about how big brands, Walkers and others, are seeing a bit of a boom at the moment because people are gravitating back to those sort of comfort brands that they've known throughout their lives, and bigger purchasing volumes are being driven. The bigger sharing bags, everything is going through, and if you've got more limited time to exercise and to work that off, that is a real challenge at the moment. And of course, obesity has been in the spotlight more recently because there's been evidence suggesting that a very high percentage of those that do end up dying from COVID-19 across age groups have had issues with obesity and the underlying issues that go with that, whether it's diabetes or heart conditions, etc. So there is a sort of interesting dilemma where people are wanting to sort of comfort eat, if you like, get through this period of isolation and shutdown and abnormality. But there's also, at the same time, there's been a huge increase in Google searches for healthy eating, healthier snacks, healthier food, etc. So, there's a sort of balancing act going on between people who are saying, "Oh, sorry, let's have a family bag or whatever," and others who are thinking, "Well, actually, I need to look at my health now, my nutrition, and work out how can I avoid some of these kind of pandemics in the future." And let's face it, there will be another one at some point, maybe not in our lifetimes, but and that's the real issue is that there has to be some work because already we know that obesity has been driving a lot of the NHS budget. It's drawn down an awful lot of that for its underlying health reason, underlying health impact. And now, of course, we've got this suggestion that it's made people more vulnerable to COVID. And therefore, there has to be an initiative by government to say, look, well, we can't, we've all been really good at getting out there and challenge and supporting the NHS and wonderful things like that army veteran walking 100 times around his garden, and last time I raised over 13 million. I mean, bless him. And extraordinary things going on. And we can't be doing all of that just in order to then just drift back into some level of complacency. So there will have to be some level of government initiative around healthier eating. But there also needs to be some responsibility for consumers to be willing to look at the other options available to them and to consider swap outs between, if for example, the work we're going to be doing in the boroughs, if we can put product on shelf which is give or take the same price as the market leader, and there is a healthier option, but without shouting the health story to people, because that's a turn off. If we can get them to make swaps that are tasty and nutritious and affordable, then little by little you can see how you can very, very gradually start to nudge the needle in the right direction. And that's not really asking very much of the consumer, because you're simply just giving them options that allow them to make their own improvements for health, and many other things they need to be doing as well with their lifestyle. But that's just a tiny thing that we can start to try and work on.
I'm interviewing a gentleman by the name of Oliver Bailey next week, and that interview will be available by the time that people are listening to this. And what he's doing is he's taking the fruit and veg from the markets that's no longer going to restaurants because they're closed, raising charity money to then buy those products, and then going and giving that to the doctors and nurses, so they haven't got to think about what they've got to go shopping for. Because you talk about that stress environment, they're doing 13, 14, 15 hours. They don't want to think. The first thing they do is go to the cafe or they go to the supermarket. They're hungry, which is the worst state to be in when you go shopping. For sure, you buy 10 times more things that you don't need and you make those healthy choices. And repurposing that produce and giving it to these guys that are working in high pressure environments as well. So it's, again, just having the ability to be able to pivot as a consumer for all the right reasons, and be able to see those possibilities and innovate with your own health and well-being. But it's having that education, that internal dialogue to be able to do it, and having those supporting challenger brands. Now, you talked about kind of that gentle nudging, and that leads into that the kind of the third part really of this conversation for me, which is around presentation skills. What are the qualities of a good presenter? Because you've got to get a message across, and being a good presenter, you've got to do to companies, to consumers, to regulators, full work. So what are the qualities of a good presenter?
Well, I think the first thing that is very obvious but worth stating is it's got to be, the presenter has got to be engaging. If you can't engage the audience, then it doesn't really matter what you're going to tell them. They're not going to switch on. They're not going to be receptive. So you need to be engaging. With that, it helps if you can be confident in the message that you're looking to deliver. It's very hard to put across a strong message if the presenter is lacking the confidence, because then you're thinking, well, actually, do they really believe in what they're saying? I think I mentioned the word authentic and authenticity before. I think there's a huge need for people to let the natural authenticity come out. I mean, you put out some very scary stats earlier on about how disengaged people can be with their jobs and the work that they do. But hopefully, if you've been put in a position to present something, you, as we do, certainly with the work that we do with the brands and the partners that we work with, and we are on the verge of signing our first corporate venturing partnership, the joint venture with one of the UK's biggest food brands, to help them get closer to challenger brands and help them to look at potential deal flow for M&A down the road. And all this is coming down to, do we have why would they trust a little old organization like us, a fraction of the size of their business, that's been going for squillions of years, to help them in what they know is a real challenge? They know they haven't got the in-house skills to bring these brands on and to develop them. They've got all the big issues of day-to-day business to worry about, rather than some scurrying little brand that's getting in the way and not yet making a profit for them. So you have to have confidence in that. And also, particularly if you're doing something which is, whether you're talking to one person or whether you're talking to a room or to an audience, you've got to be able to have empathy. You've got to, come back to this point about engagement. I'm a great believer that if you're making a presentation to a bunch of people around the table or into an auditorium, you have to make eye contact with everybody. You have to bring them with you, make them feel personally that you're talking to them. Often it's interesting. I know I've been guilty of this many times, and will be again. But you'll often find people. It's a little bit like a garden sprinkler that's kind of got slightly stuck, and it won't go to water the rest of the garden. There's people who get stuck in a certain quadrant of a room, and you're thinking, come on, you can do it, you can bring your focus over to the other side of the room. And so I would say it's about being engaging. It's about having confidence in what you're presenting and discussing, being your authentic self in that, and having the empathy, having the ability to engage with every member of your audience.
That's amazing. That's 4 really clean points to do that. And I think when you talk about that confidence and that empathy and authenticity, tapping into those things. I had a conversation yesterday, and how many people get overexcited, or they put too much importance on what they want to talk about, and they come diving in and they just blurt out a load of stuff at people, and they only give them half the message, or they give them the back end of the message and miss all the, because yes, it's all important to them, but they miss that storytelling. They miss that connection, that engagement to bring the audience on the ride, to show people the journey, that necessity that has created the invention, and the authenticity of why you're doing that, and being able to impart that empathetically, so that people go, I want to listen to this person. They do know what they're talking about. They do give a shit. They care. And I want to be a part of that. I want to support them as a leading brand or manufacturer. I want to invest in these people, so they can go to the next part of that business journey. I think those 4 top tips on effective or good presentation skills is phenomenal.
And it's what goes with that, for example, is and again, I've been guilty of this and will be again, not reading the slide. Don't just read the slide. If you put words on a slide, someone else has already read them probably by the time you're going to reference to them. So embellish them, but tell the story that goes with that. Now, I've referenced more times than I could ever imagine the Mountain of Value story that I heard from Daniel Priestley. I can't remember anything else that Daniel said in that talk that he gave 10 years ago. But I can distinctly remember that story. And I think, we only have a capacity, and as I get older, that capacity reduces day by day, but to retain information that we get. But it is the story, because we are all essentially storytellers. We tell stories to the world about ourselves. I am presenting myself in a way that tells you and your audience a story about who Paddy Willis is. And we inherently do that. It's what we do as human beings and as members of a society or of a community. But if you can tell a story, and I can sort of envisage situations now where I've been in an audience, and so there's a presenter up on stage. He might be pacing around a bit, and he or she has presented some facts, and they say, I want to tell you a story. And everyone almost is sort of leaning forward. Oh, I'm going to hear a story. Because it's a little bit like when you go back to school, I didn't always engage that well in the classes, but when the teacher said, look, it's Saturday, going to read a book. Oh, brilliant. Okay. So check, so you've taken that, and but it is this element of telling the story. And I think that's what people will carry away. They might carry away 1 or 2 facts which really struck them as being significant, maybe a statistic or something. But probably what will happen when they go back to the office or back to their spouse and they say, oh, how was your day? What was the presentation like? So, it's interesting. That's a few good things. Tell a really interesting story about X or Y. And that's, I think, so important in presenting. And it gives you that little bit of license to step away slightly from what's on the slide, to bring a bit more humanity into it, because slides tend to, by definition, be quite dry. And they're putting across the key facts. But if you can tell a story that is relating to why those facts and the story behind is relevant to the audience, why they should join you in a partnership, why they should consider your idea for the next project that your company is going to back, why you should be considered for the promotion or whatever the thing is. That's, so storytelling, absolutely critical.
And I think that's one of the prime skills of effective presentation. One is, don't just be reading off your slide, what was it? Ultimate power leads to ultimate corruption, but ultimate PowerPoint ultimately destroys everything. I think is the phrase, and then embellish with the story. That's what makes it really effective. And you brought that to life then just by saying it's like story time at school. Everybody bloody loved story time at school. Everybody loved, okay, well, I'm doing my maths, I'm making, this stuff out of pipe cleaners and blue tack or whatever. But the moment that the teacher says, right, everyone over to the reading corner, everyone over to the whatever space, we're going to do a story. Everyone, like, boom, and it's inbuilt from you from a very early point. Now, its stories have been used to pass on learning, theory, concepts for years and years and years. Do you know why the Greek dramas were so good? They were teaching you drama so you could observe human relationship under a magnifying lens, so you could learn from it. But we forgot to learn from those dramas. And what actually happened is we just ended up watching soap operas 5 times a week and getting lost in the drama rather than learning from the drama. So effective presentation, 4 tips again: engaging, confident, authentic, empathy. Include those. The effective presentation skills, really get in there with some story and bring it to life for people. Make people feel like they want to lean forward. Phenomenal. Last question.
The point about repetition is really important as well, because people get worried about repetition. They think, oh, I'm going to turn people off, I'm going to bore people. But this is something I remember being told decades ago about whenever you're imparting information to somebody in that sort of situation of a presentation, it's tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them.
Huge.
And that sort of process of set out the scene so they know what's coming, give them the information of the scene, and then wrap up the scene at the end and tell them what they've just heard. And a good presenter will do that falling off a log, and it's a real skill, but it has to be done in a way which it comes back to authenticity. It's that confidence about why I want to tell you this in the first place, and why it's important to you to listen, and why what I've just told you is still significant. And I hope you've now taken away points that will now lead to the other really important thing, which is, of course, when you conclude that presentation, is to sort of say, usual thing of thank you people for their attention and their time and everything else, but give a call to action. Is it that you want them to ask you questions? Is it that you want them to fill in the survey form that's on their chair, or is it that you want them to sign up for the next event, or the subscription, or whatever the thing is that you're, or sign a big check to fund your next project. And I think that's the thing. Often you've had a really good presentation and you're thinking, and then they say thanks very much and they walk off stage. You think, what do I do with all what do I do all that now? So I think it's really important that as I said, whatever the thing is, that you don't just leave it hanging. You've got to provide an opportunity for people to do something. They can choose not to, but give them that choice. Give them the choice to either engage further with you or your team, or to say, that was interesting, I'm going to process it, or that was interesting, hopefully it was interesting. But no. But there needs to be something which comes out of that, which is a call to action.
And then, so my next question was that how do you end a presentation? That is how you end a presentation. There is a call to action. There is something you're giving them. They are taking away a tangible action or verb, activity that is going to continue their thinking about what you just talked about. So that when they get up out of their seat, whatever, they go outside, they get on the bus, they're still thinking, what did Paddy just say? Oh, Paddy said, oh, when I spoke to the bus driver, that reminded me of this. And you're keeping that flow of thinking because you want that learning to stay in. And it was interesting. Again, it came back to that mountain of value analogy. Where's the top of the mountain? That's where we're going. Tell them where you're going to go. Okay. Lay out the roadmap and then take them up the mountain through the journey of the speech. And then when you get to the other end, you can now look back and see the journey that you've been on. So it beautifully ties in with what you said about from Daniel Priestley, engaging in those 3 core elements of a decent presentation. Phenomenal value just in that piece alone, let alone all the other stuff about challenger brands and supporting those people and the work with childhood obesity. Phenomenal. Penultimate question. It's always the same for me. What do you do to make behavioural change stick?
Oh gosh,
that's a biggie.
That's a biggie. Well, actually, I've got a little bit of personal evidence of that recently, because just before Christmas, I was suffering with some back and neck issues, and I went to a physio and did the classic thing of saying, yeah, I'll do those exercises, and then didn't really do them. I went back, and it's evident I hadn't done them. And it was just before Christmas. Actually, Christmas and New Year period, I managed to get a slot. And then I thought, if I'm going to do anything about this, I really need to make this work. Otherwise, why am I paying all this money? So I did, and now every morning without fail since Christmas, New Year period, I've got up and I've done roughly 15, sometimes extending it to 20 minutes of exercises and stretches. Some of it's sort of given to me by the physio, some of it's more kind of Pilates and yoga related. And I feel great as a result of doing that. And I get less issues, less stresses and strains in backs and necks and what have you. But years and years and years, I should have been doing that. But it took me getting to a point where I thought, you know, I'm embarrassed if I have to go back to my physio and admit that I haven't done what she asked me to do, because how does that make me look? And so it was kind of, I was shamed into doing something that I knew was going to be good for me. And so, I mean, just as an example of that, that's something which is very relevant to me now. And I now actually enjoy doing my exercise. I look forward to them. And that, I think, is how do you change behavior? You know, behavioral change is really hard. You know, not for nothing do we have the old expression, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, and leopards won't change their spots and stuff. But there are things that you can do. And I think the important thing is to make it small incremental step changes. Don't make it a huge thing that is going to really be a struggle to get around. So if it's just doing one exercise for 2 minutes every morning and building up and then adding something, and that's what I've been doing. I probably started off doing 10 minutes and I've extended it and added a few extra bits, and I've maybe done that repetition a little bit longer, and I've added in something else that I might have seen or thought was useful. But I make a point of not going stupid on it, because I'll know that the next day I'll feel guilty if I don't keep up to the same level that I did the day before. So I'm deliberately keeping it at a modest level, which I think is, you know, enough for my immediate need. I'm not putting myself forward for whenever the next Olympics are. It's just something that for my personal sort of need and satisfaction. So I think it's important to just make it baby steps, and as you go forward each time, each time you go forward, your elastic has got a little slacker, so you can take that extra step. And I think that's and be kind to yourself. Recognize that you're not going to do it all in one go, and be prepared to put the time in and wait for it to become a new habit, which is what I've managed to do in this case.
And huge value in that. They talk about, you know, if you're going to eat an elephant, you don't eat that, try and swallow it. Oh, you cut it up into bite-sized chunks. And what you're talking about is, one, shifting the secondary gains. Why am I doing this? Or actually, I'm paying this money, I need to do this. And in the nicest possible way, we're not getting any younger, you're all right. So if we don't start doing this stuff now, what's that going to look like 20 years time? Actually, you know, it's looking at that stuff. And then it's creating that, as I was thinking about it, as you were saying, like that habit bandwidth. How much bandwidth capacity do I have for this, physically, mentally, emotionally, in time, whatever? Okay, how do I create a bit more? It might be 20 minutes of exercise, but now I've got a bit more energy. Actually, I wake up 10 minutes earlier, so I can do an extra 5 minutes of exercise, so on and so forth, rather than dissuading yourself from doing it because you're not doing 45 minutes of Pilates every single morning. Because actually you don't have the capacity to do that. You build up and then you work on that and get to the point. That's huge. Great share. Last question. Where can people find you?
Well, they can find out about Mission Ventures at missionventures.co.uk, and they can look me up on LinkedIn. I'm known as Paddy Willis there, as I am in the rest of my life. And I'm also on Twitter. I'm at Paddy Willis, although I'm not terribly prolific on there. I'm more of an observer than a contributor. But happy to hear from people if there's anything that they feel I can contribute to.
Amazing. I cannot stress enough is the importance of the work that's being done by Paddy on various different avenues of helping challenger brands, these small companies that are up and coming, connecting them with bigger companies. So anyone that's listening to this that has got a food idea and they're incubating it, connect. If there are big brands that potentially are looking to bring these people on and take them to the next level, connect with Paddy. This is going to be massively supportive. And in the midst of this, he's also working to help support the initiatives and the reductions of childhood obesity, which is causing so many problems for so many people, whether they realise it or not. And we know that obesity is causing a huge strain on the NHS, as it is anyway, let alone without COVID-19. So these two avenues of work that Paddy's doing, you know, from me, Paddy, you know, from everyone out there, that you may be the ripple effect of the work that you're doing, you may not get to see. Thank you from them to you as well. Please keep doing what you're doing. Anyone that's listening to this has got value, reach out, connect with Paddy, talk to him, because he may be able to help you get that food idea out there, connect you with someone, connect you as a big company with them to make a change in someone's life. That's huge. Paddy, thank you very much from MBM. Thank you very much from the Sticky Interviews, and we'll see you on the next one. Appreciate it.